Kitsune and Remnant by Red Devil 360, Chapter 1, A New Dawn. Kitsune and Remnant. Naruto sighed and stretched when he entered his apartment late at night. He had just come back from a mission with his squad when he was requested for another immediately after. Thankfully, the mission itself wasn't for another week, but there were a lot of briefings to sit through to get the full picture. Switching on the light to the main room, he moved to the kitchenette and set the mission scroll on the table and put some water in his kettle before setting it to boil. As he waited, he walked down the hall to the bathroom and started the shower. He hadn't had one in a week, and so he probably stunk to a high in hell. He looked in the mirror and at the fox-shaped mask that stared blankly at him. It had been a rough 5 years when he was 15 and 2 years into his training trip, where Jiraiya had actually decided to train him seriously. To his surprise, he had half expected him to be second choice with both his research and spy network, but Jiraiya had but put his research on temporary hold to train him as he wanted and deserved to be trained. He was easily joining by the time with experience under his belt, no thanks to a rather large amount of missing nin and bandits, plus getting his ass handed to him by Jiraiya also serves to get him good experience as he soon found out. However, that all changed when they were recalled to answer a call to arms from Konoha. According to Jiraiya's spy network, some unknown people had been spotted landing along the coast of Fire Country and Water Country, and even some in Spring and another minor countries. They had attacked a few local villages and were making inquiries into their respective countries without restraint, apparently uncaring of the damage they caused in their wake. After a report came back from a few skirmishes, they had weapons that no one had ever seen before, big chunks of metal that spat fire and lightning. They were later told these were called guns and that the spring had a few they were experiencing with, but nothing like these people had. They were accustomed to the shot and shot only a single bullet before taking nearly 15 seconds to reload. A lifetime in a shinobi's opinion. Besides, most shinobi could run faster than the bullet traveled. Once they returned after a quick hello to his friends, a demonstration and a test, he was accepted into Ambu under the codename Kitsune. The mask specifically requested by him, seeing as the last holder of the mask was dead and no other wanted it after the events 15 years ago. They had no reason to deny him, so they accepted his request. The conflict between the two sides lasted 3 months. The outsiders had technology and the element of surprise on their side, and they were in unfamiliar territory from fighting an unfamiliar foe. It didn't help that most of their forces couldn't run faster than the average civilian, so they were completely outclassed by the shinobi in pretty much every aspect. When the fighting was said and done for, the few survivors that remained had either surrendered or gone back overseas. Once this was confirmed, both Fire and Water Country called for a summit between the five Kages. Expect this time every single leader in the Elemental Nations was called to attend. Against all odds, Kiri and Konoha united everyone against the common enemy. For the first time in their history, the EN was one nation. After a few more meetings, it was eventually decided that these people from Remnant, as they later found out, would return with more men. After much deliberation, a full refit and reorganization of their armed forces were in order. The Ashigaru were to be the foot soldiers, the backbone of their army. The R&D department in the EN had collectively reverse engineered the captured weapons of the invaders and made it their own. Along with the scientific brilliance of Spring, they had managed to improve their firearms decades ahead of their time. Trucker armor was also improved, and along with the guns, they were put into mass production. With the combined industrial might of the EN, they managed to fill the quota quicker than estimates predicted. The samurai became the special forces, as it were. Their already skilled swordsmen filled the role well, most being able to go toe to toe with a shinobi. said people were pushed to the back, becoming the Black Ops. They embraced the shadows from whence they came. Shinobi, unlike the Ashigaru and select samurai, stuck to tradition and avoided the use of firearms. The once leisurely academics that taught history and math more than ninja skills was scraped and replaced with real schools that taught you how to kill. The villages themselves became their namesake and were wiped from all maps made to become a guerrilla force should all else fail. Requesting a mission was done through a third man, and to actually go to a village itself, you needed an shinobi escort while blindfolded and earplugs in. They were the epitome of secrecy, just how they liked it. Ambu, however, were given firearms, only pistols, mind you, silenced the ones at that, but to survive is to adapt. The Ambu were the best of the best of the best. Few made it into the core. Every fewer made it out. Every mission they took considered suicide, so much so many believed that it was inhuman for such a place to exist. The military wasn't the only thing to change. It was agreed that for this to work they needed a united government. A leader was to be elected to represent a council of daimyo, and the shinobi elected to become an oligarchy with the five kage at top and the high jonin below them to manage the shinobi. The two reformed governments worked tirelessly together for a year to dig in and fortify up, and wait for people from Remnant to return. A year later they did, and in force. They attacked all over the elemental nations with such fervor and ferocity that the lines almost buckled in the first few months. Multiple minor nations were almost lost, and the capital of Lightning Country was in danger of falling into enemy hands. It was only in the grace of Kumo and Iwa that it didn't. In a daring maneuver, two squads of ninja, one from each village, they raided the enemy's camp at night, killing as many as they could while destroying supplies and gathering intelligence. It worked. The opposing army didn't have the supplies or manpower to prolong the siege, and morale had hit rock bottom. They were open to a counterattack, and with Kumo and other villages leading the charge, they routed the army out of the elemental lightning country altogether. It was 4 months until they found their footing. The lines held, and counterattacks were being put into motion. During the war, innovations were made, everything that they could. Ships were bigger and stronger, airships were faster and made of steel instead of wood, with engines. Trains ran on electricity rather than steam or coal. Cars and trucks became a commonplace rather than horse-drawn carriages. Despite the fact that a war was ongoing, the progress that was made during that time was formidable, and the many people higher up in the government secretly thought that the war was a good thing in the end, despite the death and suffering on both sides. Overall, the war lasted 2 years and 1 month, with millions dead on both sides. The people from Remnant called for a truce 2 months after their eviction from the mainland. C, the last country to finally push them out, do combined operation between most of the remaining shinobi and foot soldiers, was the seed of a last stand from the invaders. Still reeling from the culture shock of there being another continent out there, the damage along with the loss of life they sustained, they agreed. Diplomacy was slow but moving. Of course, the language barrier didn't help, but that's not important. And so 5 months since the end of the war, we find our blonde-haired fox staring blankly into the mirror with the shower on and the kettle whistling in the background. Blinking himself out of his reminiscing, he returned and walked out of the bathroom to get changed. First, he took off his mask and placed it on his bed. Next, he discarded his white cloak, depicting him as an Abu captain. Then, with practiced ease, he stripped himself off of the standard Ambu garb, placing his weapons on the desk and armor on his bed beside his mask and cloak. His dirty clothes were chucked into the hamper, and walked back across the hall into the bathroom. He idly traced his battle scars when he walked past the mirror. Most were gunshot wounds, but some were cuts and stabs from the hunter remnants was so fond of, many of which were more than a match for the average shinobi, a rather large shock to the system. Their aura was a bitch to deal with. After a quick 2-minute shower, he was clean and dressed in a simple t-shirt and boxer shorts. He walked through his apartment to the kitchenette. "Tea or coffee?" he called out as he pulled off 2 mugs from the small rack he had. "Coffee, please." Another voice replied from the seemingly empty apartment. Naruto chuckled at the laid-back voice and put coffee on both mugs before adding the water. When the scent filled his nose, he smiled and grabbed two pairs of chopsticks as he poured milk and sugar into the coffee. He stirred both, walked over the living room area where Kakashi sat, putting bowls of Ichiraki ramen on the coffee table. Naruto sat beside him, putting on the mugs in front of the man, and handed a pair of chopsticks to the man. They ate in silence for a while, just relaxing, unlike they had been able to do so for a while. It wasn't long until the ramen was eaten, and they both sat just sipping on their drinks. Eventually, Kakashi spoke up. "What are your thoughts on the mission?" he asked. Naruto shrugged. "I'm worried if anything. I'm going back to school in potentially hostile territory, thousands of miles away from my homeland, with limited supplies and ammunition, and no friends to speak of. Yes, everything is just fine," Naruto mocked. Kakashi sighed. "It's not as bad as you think. You will be stocked up with enough kunai, shuriken, and ammo to last an army. An Anbu squad will be on constant rotation to be summoned by you if the need arises. If the worst does happen by the time you would need reinforcements, at least the whole platoon will be ready. You must remember you are one of the most powerful shinobi Konoha has, if not the whole elemental nations," Kakashi reasoned. Naruto sighed. "I suppose you're right, but why me, Hokage-sama?" he asked with a snarky tone. A smirk danced across his lips. Kakashi slumped in his seat. "I'm never going to get used to that," he moaned. Tsunade had stepped down after the war. Onoki and Mei had also stepped down from their respective villages, replaced by their chosen successors, Kurotsutsu and Chojuro. "If you must know, it's because you're my successor," he said rather bluntly. Naruto froze in his seat, the mug of coffee halfway to his mouth. Kakashi chuckled. "That shut you up," he said with a nice smile. Naruto thawed out and calmly placed his mug on the table. Moments later he let out a jubilant whoop and began doing a little jig in his seat while Kakashi just watched in amusement. After a few minutes he calmed down and began drinking again. "Why me?" he asked again, this time for a different reason. Kakashi raised a brow and took a sip of his coffee. "Why do you ask? I thought it was your dream." "Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm overjoyed that you've picked me to succeed you, but you truly think I'm ready?" he questioned, worry entering his voice. "More than ready." Naruto's head snapped at him. "You've grown immensely over the past few years, and not just in your height. You've changed from a boy who used to shout about how he was going to be Hokage to a young man that garners respect from pretty much every shinobi in the village and out of it," Kakashi told him, proudness evident as he spoke. "Not to mention how powerful you are. You can beat me now in most of our spars, and even Jiraiya says that you're beginning to win more often than not when you fight. If you think I'm so ready, why am I leaving?" "Because you need a break," Kakashi said simply. Naruto's brow rose in question. "You've been working non-stop during and after the war. You need a break and just rest," Kakashi explained. "Besides, when I nominated you for the position, everybody else agreed, so—" Kakashi trailed off. He wasn't chosen just by Kakashi, but the rest of the Kages as well. Naruto sighed. "I take it it's a non-negotiable?" "Yep!" He had smiled while popping the pea. Naruto just shook his head in amusement. The room elapsed into silence once again. All having been said, eventually Kakashi stood, coffee mug on the table empty. "Right, I should be off. Paperwork to do, porn to read, you understand," he said as he headed to the door. Naruto waved him off as he finished his own coffee, sighed when he heard the door close. He stood and grabbed the scroll off his kitchen table and skimmed through it and almost groaned in despair. Simply put, he was going back to school. The head teacher of Beacon, a school for aspiring hunters, had offered to host someone of the Ian's choice in hopes of improving relations. Everything would be paid for, and all he had to do was attend classes with the other students, as he would be attached to one of their teams as a plus one, creating a team of five. Simple in theory, harder in practice. There was a lot of study and preparation, along with the fact he had to learn an entire language in a single week. He found himself thanking the gods for shadow clones, and not for the first time, making himself more coffee. He set to work. A week later, he found himself jumping across the rooftops as he headed towards the main gate to meet the headmaster. It had been a long but successful week. While he wasn't fluent, he could easily hold a conversation in their language, English, and read it with writing was a little more difficult due to the stark difference between kanji and written words, but he made do. He was fully stocked up on everything that he would need, and more so, there was no room for error or mistakes. Not that he wanted any. So, with his goodbye said and his visit to the memorial stone over, he was on his way to school again. Since Kakashi and the other Kage theorized that Remnant wouldn't appreciate them sending a trained killer to a school full of children, so he had elected to change out of his Anbu gear. It was replaced by standard Jonin uniform with the flak jacket, kunai, and shuriken pouches and sandals. However, he had a ninja toe strapped diagonally across his back, with a handle over his right shoulder and a tanto also across his back, but with the handle over his left shoulder. Both blades were held up burnt orange leather straps that connected to a belt around his waist, and along the straps the belt were held for four scrolls, one of which contains his Zambu gear and his personal sealing supplies. He wore his red with black flames sage coat and a face mask that Kakashi had given a number of to hide his face. In the eventuality that everything did go tits up, he was to cause as much trouble as he could before disappearing entirely. It would be easier to do so if no one knew what he looked like. To finish, he wore a headband with the kanji for shinobi on it on his forehead and another around his left arm with the leaf symbol on it. His hair had also grown slightly. It was longer than before, but not by much, just enough where a few bangs of hair flew over his headband, slightly obscuring the symbol, and it also got slightly darker. It didn't take long to reach the front gates too short in his opinion. Not that it mattered at the moment. With a final hop, he landed at the open gates, and his eyes immediately zeroed in on the man standing there in a suit, green scarf, and strangely small glasses. It was also worth mentioning that his hair was gray and he carried a cane, an old man then. Naruto casually walked up to him and raised a hand in greetings. "I guess you're Professor Ozpin," he asked in almost fluent English. Said man raised an eyebrow at the language. "That I am, young man. And you are?" he asked, holding his hand out to shake. Naruto shook and was almost surprised at the firm grip the man had. "Naruto Uzumaki, though I will go by Kitsune for the duration of my stay at Beacon." "I understand, and I must say your English is very good," Ozpin complimented with a smile. "As welcoming as your village is, we should leave soon if we are to make it on time to catch our ride," he explained. Naruto nodded. "Don't worry about time, but I'm ready to leave when you are?" Naruto asked. Ozpin nodded, but raised a brow. "I am, but where is your luggage?" he questioned, rather confused by the lack of bags. Naruto patted the scrolls at his waist and the rucksack he carried over his shoulder. "This is all I will need. If I require anything more, then I'm sure I can purchase some in the city of Vale near the school. Am I correct?" Ozpin nodded, although not entirely convinced. He said nothing more. Naruto, taking this as an answer, continued, "Although if you are ready, then I just need to sign us out, so bear with me." With that said, Naruto turned and walked to the tuning in the guardhouse, greeting them as he did so with a few shared words. He wrote down his name, rank, and serial number, and added a +1. And just like that, they were free to leave. Naruto headed back to Ozpin, and he led them out the gate and down the well-used road. They walked for about 20 minutes when the village finally left their sight. "Did the shinobi who brought you here take you in a shunshin?" Naruto brought the silence with a question. "I'm sorry?" Ozpin seemed confused. "I'll take that as a no. Well, it's a technique that will get us to our destination quicker if you are willing," Naruto explained. Ozpin thought for a moment. "Well, I don't see why not." Naruto placed a hand on his shoulder and held up a half-rammed sign. Hold onto your lunch, he cautioned before they both disappeared in a flurry of wind and leaves. They reappeared at the edge of a port town. Ozpin immediately stumbled out, refrained from throwing up. However, he was rather pale in the face. I'm impressed most puke on their first go, Naruto complimented as he waited for the man to gather himself. He did so, and Ozpin nodded, signaling that they could continue. Naruto led them through the town marker, a shortcut to the docks he remembered from the last time he was here, though it was under worse circumstances last time. I take it you have a ship waiting for us? He asked. I do. However, I doubt that they are ready, as we made a better time than I expected, Osmond said, commenting on the fact that they made a day-long journey in less than 10 minutes. Naruto shrugged. I have no problem with waiting. They eventually reached the dock ship that was prepared to take off to Vacuo, where they would then get a bullhead directly to Beacon. As predicted, the crew and captain were unprepared for their timely arrival, but not as bad as they thought. Thus, it only took an hour before they were ready to leave. Naruto took a deep breath and looked out at his home country for what was to be the last time in a few years. With a final sweep of the scenery, he boarded the boat, unaware of just what waited for him on the other side. End of chapter 1.